Welcome to the Mindset Architect Podcast, where it's all about creating the life you want, the business you want, and making a real difference. Join us in unlocking the code to true success. And now your host, Tony Caliendo, Master Coach with Rethink Coaching.
Welcome to the Mindset Architect Podcast, episode number 24. I'm Tony Caliendo, Master Coach here at Rethink Coaching, and I want to welcome you and thank you. I say this all the time. Time is our biggest gift, and the fact that you are willing to invest time with me means so much to me. Today's podcast is maybe going to be a little bit different than anything we've talked about in the past, yet it's connected to them. I want to talk about your possibilities not only in life, but in your career or your desired career. And I have people ask me frequently, how did you get to where you are? Right. And I'm not saying that like, oh my gosh, people want to be me. That is not it. But if you look at the trajectory of my career from being a kid raised in Omaha, Nebraska to a phenomenal career in corporate America with Marriott hotels to living in Dallas and Austin and California and Santa Fe, and people will ask, what's your secret? How did you do it? And I think I'm fairly transparent. And really, it's the reason why I created the podcast is because I wanted you to be able to create whatever life that you wanted to create and I wanted to give you some resources that have helped me in my businesses and in my life. And so that's really what today's podcast is about. And there are two universal laws. There are a ton of universal laws, but there's two that run a repeat theme for me on the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly. And I want to talk about these two universal laws because when I sat down and thought, what is it that allowed me to have the breakthrough, right, to do what I'm doing and create my world by intention, right, not just by default. These two universal laws kept coming top of mind. And so they are, number one, you get what you deserve in your imagination is one of the universal laws. And the other one is change your thinking, change your world. Okay. Those two laws, if you will, are what made the biggest impact that has allowed me to live the life that I live and have the business that I have. And it's funny, I go back to, and I think I've shared this with you guys and gals in a previous podcast, is I think about you get what you deserve in your imagination. And I can remember a time, like when I was in college, I really did want to be in the hotel industry. So I started off as a reservation agent in Omaha, Nebraska with Marriott hotels. This back in the day before people could book on the internet, taking reservations over the phone. You had to call an 800 number. I was one of the operators that answered. And I knew I wanted to be in the hospitality industry at that time. And I'll tell you why I thought that. And I started that career, had a great career in sales, in operations, general manager, regional, the whole bit, had an amazing career. And then I stepped out of that into the real estate world. But here's what I know. And I've said this before, at some point, I don't know when it happens. My guess is early education, first, second grade. We are somehow told, or what we experience is that stop dreaming, stop playing make-believe. We don't allow and encourage a lot of time in our imagination. At least in my world, it didn't. School was very structured. There was an agenda. We were getting through it, and would say that's probably one of the things that we do, especially as Americans in our society, which I think is one thing that I would love to see change, is to encourage playing the make-believe, encourage allowing children to have a vivid imagination, because that's where we get to discover our passions in life. So, how did I end up in the hotel industry? I will tell you, in high school, we get a couple counselors, right? A guidance counselor, a career counselor. And what I find now, looking back on it, a bit frustrating or fascinating, as one of my old mentors would say, is that we're really kind of pigeonholed into certain lanes or industries, right? I mean, I don't ever remember my high school guidance counselor, career counselor saying, if you could be anything, what would you be? Don't worry about succeeding or failing. Don't worry about money. Just what would you be? It was more, here are your choices. You can go get a certification, so mechanic or cosmetology or whatever. You can go a baker, you can go get a certification and be this, or you can go on to higher education where you can go into business or you can go into teaching or you can go into law. I mean, it was very narrow lanes that they would have you pick from. And so it was in that moment that I made the decision to go into the hospitality world because I enjoyed the experience of staying and traveling when I was younger in hotels. And so I was like, well, if I got to go into business, as it's one of the choices being presented to me, I'm going to do it here. And I'm not saying that was a bad thing because everything I learned in that time in that corporate phase of my life was amazing. It's most likely what allowed me to be successful as an entrepreneur because I learned how to run a successful business truly from, P&Ls and forecasts and budgets and all of that stuff I learned. But what I am saying is I'm just curious what would have happened if I was encouraged to dream my whole elementary, middle, and high school where I might have ended up. And I do wish that we would at some point as a society allow that to back in. I don't recall anybody coming to me saying, you can't do that anymore. Stop playing make believe. I don't remember that, but I just know it didn't exist anymore. And so you forget about it. So you get what you deserve in your imagination. Well, if you're not spending time in your imagination, how are you going to get what you deserve? We just sometimes fall into or are directed into a career, and it may not be our choice. It may just be what was presented to us. And that to me is probably one of the biggest disservices we can give to people, in taking that part away, because what if, right? What if? So I will say that has been instrumental. And part of this, right? So hotel industry and then real estate industry since 2001. So I've been in the real estate industry for a long time. And I started off as an agent representing buyers and sellers. Then I ran a team. Then I was in leadership, franchise ownership. Then I was in coaching, and it kind of went on and on. But what I realized was I was in the right industry of real estate. I just wasn't maybe in the right position. And so when I allowed myself to lean into dream and imagine, it was to do what I'm doing today, and that's coaching. And then it was with that coaching division, I also allowed myself to dream and imagine what would it look like if I could provide my clients with both business strategies and mindset strategies. Because when I got introduced to that concept is when everything in my world changed. My success, my income, all of that changed. And so that was allowing myself to dream and create Rethink Coaching came out of spending some time in my imagination. What would it be like if? And I didn't necessarily worry about how. Previous podcasts, you'll hear me talk about that it wasn't easy, but I didn't really get caught up in the how. I just allowed myself to dream and imagine what would it be like if I had a coaching company that allowed me to coach business strategy and mindset strategy, because business strategy without mindset strategy is limiting. Mindset strategy without business strategies is limiting. But when you put the two together, is powerful. And so that has allowed me to create the business that I have because I spent some time dreaming it. And I will tell you how it happened. The coach that I had at the time, that she was actually running the division, she wasn't my personal coach, really challenged us, myself in particular, and asked if I allowed myself to have thinking time in my schedule. And I didn't, right? And I thought, well, that's kind of silly. I think every day, right? You think a lot, right? We know we have 60,000 thoughts a day. But I really wasn't creating the space for envision or visioning what I wanted in the future. It was more about the daily. So that was my first real introduction to creating thinking time. And it was in that space, then I was able to think about what if, what's next, what could I do that would really excite me, and spend that. And also was great time to strategize and to think about how I could be a best coach for the clients that I had at the time. So it was the thinking time, that time to spend in my imagination, that allowed me to get to where I am today. So when people ask me how I ended up here, I tell them a lot of it was because of what I allowed myself to envision and the thinking that I created around it. So once, I kind of had what was in my imagination drawn out, then I had to change my thinking around it. So, in our industry and in my life, I was not really taught that you could move and live in multiple cities, right? That just wasn't ever something we taught about. So I had to change my thinking about it, because I knew, for me, that part of my life by intention and design involved living in multiple cities. And I had to change my thinking around it. So I had to change my thinking around the type of coach and the way I was going to coach. And I had to change my thinking around how I was going to incorporate my life into it that would allow me to be fluid in where I lived. That is what has gotten me to where I am. So I have the coaching company that I desired and imagined, and I'm really blessed. I get to live in primarily in Santa Fe, and then I spend time in California as well. So I created this. It didn't just happen. Nobody said on February 1st, 2000, here, this is what you get. You get a coaching company, you get to choose the cities you live in, go do whatever. I had to create it. So I'm asking you to take some time to think about, are you living the life that you want, or are you living it in somewhat of a default? I'm gonna be really honest. I have witnessed really successful real estate professionals crushing it, making a ton of money, but they are not living their life by intention. It's through default. They're not doing what their true passion is, but they're doing what pays the bills and allows them to have a big income. So I'm going to ask you to really just spend some time. I'm not saying walk away from your career. My gosh, don't. But I'm really asking you to really take a moment and say, have I created my life by intention, or am I living in a space of default? Am I doing things just because that's the way you do it? Or is it bringing me greater joy? And then what's my thinking around it to help make it come to life? Because what you focus on expands. What you pay attention to, you get more of. So as soon as you get your imagination and your thinking in alignment is when magical things can happen. So I'll share with you two times where this really worked for me, and I was able to experience firsthand the power of your imagination and the power of changing your thoughts. So the first time was, we were living in Dallas, Texas. I'd been there for a long time, and we decided to buy a secondary home on a lake, hour-ish outside of Dallas. So it was easy commute, whatever. And we went on a visit, and we found a house that we fell in love with. Now, it wasn't for sale, but it was a house that we fell in love with. We're like, you know what? If we're going to move to the lake, this is what we want. So part of our exercises that we did in terms of getting what you deserve in your imagination was creating a vision board. And so we had a picture of that house on our vision board. Now, this lake is, I think, like 325, 330 shoreline miles. It was a huge lake in Texas, huge, with a lot of opportunities onto where you could buy and what you could buy. So fast forward, I think it was 18-ish months later, after we made the decision we were going to do this and the house that we wanted. It took us a while to get going, but once we did it, we ended up going under contract and buying a house. And I was driving to it for one of the first times, and I realized that the house on our vision board was just down the road, probably a quarter of a mile away, on the same part of this 325 shoreline mile lake. We ended up in this space of less than a quarter of a mile away from the dream house. And the house that we bought, we were able to redesign into the same look and feel of the house that was on our vision board. So that was the first time I got clarity around, you get what you deserve in your imagination. So vision boards are a great way to bring your imagination to life. The second one was I always had in the back of my mind, in my dream world, was the ability to live in two different cities and to have a career that I could work from anywhere in the world. And that happened, right? I today am sitting in my beautiful office here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, enjoying the gorgeous weather we're having today. It's going to be in the 50s. It's warm. There's snow in the mountains. If you want to go skiing, you can go hiking. That was the other time that I was given proof that you do get what you deserve in your imagination. And it takes changing your thinking to change your world, because to go from being stationary in one city to living in multiple cities and then being able to travel to wherever you want, I had to change the way I thought. I was brought up in a fairly, it doesn't matter if it's conservative or not, but that's just not something you did. And I didn't know a lot of people in my industry that were able to do what I wanted to do. It wasn't until I met a really good friend of mine who she was a consultant coach, and they were based out of San Diego, but she had kids throughout the country. And she started creating the space for herself to live in multiple cities while her career was flourishing. It was that person, Beth, that allowed me to get a glimpse of it was possible. So I was able to lean into what she did and then lean into my imagination, then change the way I thought, because somebody I knew was already doing it, so I could do it. So those two things I'm going to ask you to really put some thought into around yourself. Are you A, allowing yourself to imagine and dream? Are you B, changing your thinking around that to support it, to make it a reality? And are you creating a life in a business by intention, or are you in it by default? Are you in where you are just by default? And you know what? Here's the great news. If you are incredibly successful at what you're doing, I believe that's a sign that you should keep doing it. But ask yourself the other questions. Is it where I want to be? Am I living how I want to live? Do I want multiple homes? Do I want this? Do I want that? And allow yourself to have that space of your imagination. I still do this on the daily. I build in thinking time. My current coach would like it sometimes to be a little bit more strategic, but I build in the space of thinking and imagining. And I am thinking of amazing things for my future, from travel to houses to lifestyles to what I can do with the money and what I can do with charities and people that are important to me. I spend that time in that because when I do, it changes the way I think. And I become intentional about the way I think because I start thinking in terms of possibility and start thinking in ways that I can make that imagination come true. So spend some time asking yourself, are you living by intention? Are you living by default? Is your business designed by intention, or is it designed by default? And if you're in a default phase, go spend some time in your imagination. Allow yourself some time to dream. Dream big. Create an amazing vision board so that you can see it. It's a good visual for you and remind you of what's going on that would be your ideal outcome. Because again, our lake house and the life that we're living right now is a direct reflection of what was in my imagination or in our imagination. And it has allowed us to live the way that we're living. So this has not been, I did not want this to be a podcast of look at me, look at me. I want this to be a podcast of challenging you to think differently and to dream again, to step into your imagination. I hope, and this was my intention when I started this podcast, was to demonstrate to people, especially entrepreneurs in the real estate world, that anything is possible. And I wanted to be the person that made it possible, that showed people that living a big life or doing big things is possible and that you can create it. So I know I talked a little bit this podcast about how this is impacted, but I think it's important for you to understand that where you are has happened because of what's happened in your imagination and the way you're thinking. Think about it for a second. Where you are is a direct result of your imagination and your thinking. If you've stopped dreaming, then chances are your thinking is how do I make the best of what I got? Versus if you allow yourself to dream and imagine and you can change your thinking, other things can happen. So I just want to put that out there that this was not meant to be a podcast of, look at how successful and that part. It was to create the space of possibility and to invite you to start living by the two universal laws that I think have had some of the biggest impact on the life I get to live. And that is you get what you deserve in your imagination, change your thinking, change your world. You marry those two things together, and I promise you amazing things will happen. You'll start to attract opportunities into your life that wouldn't necessarily come your way if you weren't clear on these things. That's, in my opinion, how the world works. You put out what you want, you think about what you want, you dream and you fantasize about what you want, and then you start changing your thoughts around how do I make this happen for me? And then stuff shows up. It just always does. So that's what I'm going to invite you to do today, is to just take a good inventory of where you are versus where you'd like to be. And if you haven't dreamt or used your imagination, do it. Start structuring your thought around it and be intentional and create the life that you want to live. Okay, team, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. This was a podcast I think was really important for me to present to you because I want everybody to be living their best and living through intention and to regain what was taken away from us, most of us in early childhood, of play into your imagination and have a really good time with it. As always, if you have any questions, reach out to me. Tony at rethinkcoaching.com is my email. My Instagram handle, Tony M, like Merton Caliendo, is my Instagram. You can Google me, find my cell phone. You're always welcome to reach out to me and just say, hey, I was listening to your podcast on your two favorite universal laws, right? Your imagination and your thoughts. And I got a question, and I will be happy to spend some time with you answering any question or potentially redirecting you so that you can achieve what you want to achieve and receive in life. Thanks for being here. We will see you next week. Go make it an awesome week. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, you must come check out the Mindset Architect Group Coaching Program. It's our monthly program where we explore the power of your mindset, help you identify what you truly want in business and life, and then help you reach those goals. Come check us out at rethinkcoaching.com/group-program. That's rethinkcoaching.com/group-program. We'll see you there.